Hey guys, it's Jason Snavely, certified wildlife biologist and founder and president of Drop-Tine Wildlife Consulting, the Drop-Tine Seed Company, and of course, Drop-Tine Podcast. Guys,
all right, bonus episode today, and I almost stopped recording again. Not sure why I'm doing that, but we're going to do a shorter, condensed version. First of all, I want to say it is, for some context here, it's the end of May. So it's May, 30th, something like that. June is right around the corner. Most importantly, it is Memorial Day weekend. And I just want to observe that. Thank all the veterans, super badasses who keep us safe. And, of course, provide us with the freedom of speech and all of our other great freedoms so we can sit here and podcast and be safe. So super appreciate everyone, all the veterans, those who are here now and are gone. Thank you. Just kind of sitting here. Actually, it's a Sunday morning, sitting here talking to a friend of mine. I'm in my office in the studio, so we decided, what the heck, we're just going to go ahead and hit record. I think everybody now knows who David Kleinschmidt is, partner with Understanding Ag. David, how's it going?
Man, you called me up this morning. You've been blowing up my phone all day about doing a podcast, so here we are. I'm loving life. Let's do it.
Sunday morning, man. What a
Sunday morning.
I'm super excited about this new product I have, and I know you now. It's like introducing a newborn child to you, man. I was so excited, and I wanted your blessing, and of course you bounced a lot of ideas back, and you are one of many who I use to sort of steer me on my crazy ADHD thinking when I'm blending something. And so your input's much appreciated. But really, we've already had I don't know how long we've been talking this morning, conversation about not just the Summer Squatch blend, which we snuck on the website late 2 nights ago, and people are already buying it without even knowing what it is. So been wanting to do a podcast. I was going to go solo, but David's been kind enough to jump on here, so I don't have to. Well, I should say, so you don't have to just listen to me solo it. But we will be doing more of that. There's been a lot of questions or a lot of emails, texts, whatever, where you want to hear, listeners want to hear more. What's in the blend? What's in the blend? Why is it in the blend? And then what do we use it for? And you know, that sort of the thing that I don't think a lot of people understand is we started blending food plot seed before we started selling it. As a consultant, I worked for some of the food plot seed companies, and you know, we weren't happy all the time, or it just didn't fill a particular need for a client in, say, Kentucky or Michigan or Mississippi or whatever. So we would make a custom blend. That led to the seed company, and this blend I'm super excited about. David, I think, I was just telling you that it's timely because here we are, end of May. I'm rushing the season. That's the second time I did that.
Keep doing this.
I know. End of May, early June, and we've got some guys who are looking at some super cool fall reload plots that were planted last fall. And we'll do it. We'll dissect fall reload in another episode in the future, which I just eviscerated again for this fall, and it's even better. But those things are coming back this March, and they just exploded. March, April, May, and now we're looking at just a field of massive plant growth. Stop me at any point if you want to. I'm soloing it anyway because I'm excited. But so not all of our blends are on the website. So Fall Nourishment's another one. I kind of kept that one in my pocket for clients only and didn't really sell it commercially for I think 3 or 4 years now. And I believe I'm going to add that one to the website just because I'm happy with the way that, and more importantly, clients all over the country are happy with the way it came back. So at any rate, sort of the context of this podcast and this product that I call Summer Squatch, which is a play off of Adam Doherty. I'll give Adam some credit here. If you want to hear a great podcast, I don't know the episode number, but go back. several episodes and listen to that podcast with Adam. He will definitely keep you laughing. But so here we are. We've had 3-4 months, whatever the growing season, and we're right between that spring and fall, which I told David was kind of like our cover cropping season, to be honest with you, because our cash crop is in the fall, attracting bucks or whatever for harvest observation. But we kind of have this period of time in the middle, which can be a difficult time agronomically. You like that word, David?
I do.
That's your world.
Did you just pull that out?
No, it's a real word, I think. But I'm going to set it up and let you kind of talk about that. So what do you do? Obviously, we're talking about deer. Your world is ag, which is cooler and more profitable. But you know, we like wildlife, and that's what we do. But kind of what's going on right now in the field when the cool seasons are kind of petering out, and then the fall seasons are like 60, 45 to 70 plus days, depending on where you're at, from now.
Yeah, so like a lot of those fall seeded biennials and even some of those annuals that were sown back in October, September, October time frame, they're all maturing out, depending on your latitude, of course. Maturing, blooming, and now, like in the row crop world, we've planted our cash crops into that. And, it just depends on what a guy's goal was, to suppress out some weeds or, attract some beneficial predator insects, supply some nutrient cycling, obviously cycling a bunch of carbon into that soil. But, that's where we are on the row crop side. When I think about the deer and the wildlife in general, trying to keep those animals onto your landscape reminds me of, and feeding them these diets reminds me a lot of like trying to do grass finished cattle on annuals. And, if we sowed something in that fall time and it's maturing out right now, and then we're going to plant, a warm season cover crop, basically now through June, those won't be ready to be grazed for another 30 days. So we've got like this 60-day void that we've got to be filling, right? In that time frame. So that's where I look at like some of these spring mixes that could go in there, be vegetative basically now through the end of June, 1st of July to fill that void. One of the same thing, what we were talking about with this this new mix that you've developed that's pretty awesome. Will help fill some of that summer void as well, depending on some goals and everything. But I think it's pretty cool mix to help cycle some nutrients and suppress out weeds and create some awesome habitat.
Yeah, no doubt. I thought I was going to have to hand it over to you to do the mono there for a minute. But
no, no, you should shut me up.
No, I agree. So just to kind of set it up, I know a lot of folks are going to say, well, wait a minute, what's summer reload for then? So there's going to be a lot of applications for summer reload, and sometimes there's, it's a toss-up. You nailed it on the head. I think you said, what's a guy's goal, or depending on a guy's goal. I just had a conversation with a new client yesterday in Missouri, and he's had other consultants, one from Missouri, visit him, and I was astonished when I asked him, he was asking me if I'm the right fit. I said, well, what are your goals and objectives? I mean, maybe I'm not, maybe I am. And he didn't know. He didn't have goals and objectives. And I'm sitting there thinking, or actually I think I said, well, that's probably part of the reason why the first consultant didn't work out. Because if you don't know what your goals and objectives are, how are you going to have a successful outcome? And that consultant's job, as you do an excellent job in your context, in your world, I know you never talk to a client or visit a client without understanding what their goals and objectives are. So my goals and objectives for this particular, for Summer Squatch, I wanted to have this 60-day roughly. Again, don't take that literally, give or take, to produce a super tall growing mix. Essentially, so this Summer Squatch play, Squatch is short for Sasquatch. So what we're essentially doing is establishing and building Sasquatch habitat. So like you said, we're also cycling nutrients. We're obviously pumping a boatload of carbon into the system. But the weed suppression when you lay it down is going to be absolutely enormous. So we're setting up the stage with what I like to call our kind of seed beds. So I'm watching all these conventional farmers around me plow everything up and create these naked seed beds. And then we get these heavy rains and they wonder where all the water goes or all the soil goes. And David, you and I send pictures back and forth during these downpours. And you're watching everything export off the field and you're just shaking your head. And it kind of makes you sick to your stomach then because you know what it's doing to the ecosystem. But back to my goal. So we've got several different warm season, basically grasses, forbs, brassicas, legumes, you name it. But we're looking to produce summertime Sasquatch habitat. So you've got this period of late May, June. You've basically got the 2 months. You're producing summer Sasquatch habitat, or summer squatch as it's called. And then, late July through August, essentially, depending again on your latitude, you're rolling this down and drilling fall reload right into it, fall nourishment right into it. Or if you're into some of the other blends, fall fuel, full draw 7, greens and beans, whatever. So that's, I wish there was more to it. And there is, as David and I talk about it, because obviously we're going to continue to fine tune and tweak this. But this particular blend right here, I think is going to be fantastic for soil health and for allowing a guy to get ahead, setting the stage for the fall planting.
I'd agree. I kind of alluded to it earlier, but this mix looked like is a really, really high amount of grasses. Not really high amount, just in proportion in the mix to the legumes and broadleaves. It was a little bit higher. So you're going to get this, huge canopy out there that, in essence, every time that I've walked into, a mix similar to this, I could chase deer out. You could hear other turkeys in there or anything else, just they love it. It's kind of like a habitat that they go into to hide. But in the summertime, it's easily 20 to 30 degrees cooler inside that canopy.
No doubt.
And the ground has more moisture to it. So the cool thing about all these tall species and a lot of leaves, if you're in a humid environment, you can collect a lot of dew on those leaves in the early morning and nighttime. And basically that plant is funneling it right down to its root system. So you could be walking through an area that you're kicking up dust and you go into this tall mix and you've got mud on your boots because there's just so much moisture in there. And I watch my dogs out here in the yard. I mean, they'll go into anything tall and dig a hole and lay in there during the summer just because it's cooler. Plus the soil has more moisture and it's cooler on them too. So think about an animal. They want to stay cool. They don't have air conditioning to get into like you and I. They're pretty lazy some days. So,
lazy.
Right. And so that's what they're doing, right?
Yeah, no doubt. I was telling you about this story, and I may have, I don't know if I brought it up on a podcast or not before, but 2011 maybe, somewhere in there. Or I'm sorry, 2011, 12. That sounds like a long time ago. We were filming. We had it set up to film eastern Montana, a Powder River bow hunt. That was when I was filming a Bucks of Tecumate bow hunt. The first one, because I had to beg David Morris to have a bow hunt. They wanted to use guns and kill stuff, and I get it. I wanted to use a bow. So anyway, we had this set up, super high pressure. He said, you got to kill. I said, all right, but the ranch owner, he's got some big bucks, but I'm not going to kill a 3-year-old. It's going to be a mature buck. So we get out there, and the outfitter meets me at the airport, and he says, and later, this was a setup, I realized later on, but he says, man, you're not going to be happy with me. I said, why? What's the matter? It's like a 50,000-acre ranch along the Powder. He says, well, the rancher decided he was going to plant Sudan grass, and by plant, I mean it was like 20, 30,000, stupid amount, acres of Sudan grass instead of corn, and he's going to chop it for silage. And I'm like, oh, God, here we go. This has been in the works for like a year and a half, and basically the corn was supposed to be sitting up a little higher with the alfalfa down by the river bottoms. So we get there the first evening. Of course, in Montana, you sit like 3 miles out, and you're glassing. First buck that comes out is like a 160, 170. It comes out of the Sudan grass, kind of like a movie. And I'm like, that's not a bad buck. Before you know it, this 180 something steps out. And there's bucks in the 130s, 140s, just piling out. Exactly what you're talking about. It was 94 degrees that year in September in Montana. I think it snowed like 2 days later. But it was so hot in that stuff that they were obviously imprinted on bedding in that all summer long. They would pour out of that in the evenings, filter down through the alfalfa plot to the river bottoms, and it was like cheating. It was like shooting ducks on a pond. We had a fantastic bow hunt and filmed a really good show. But exactly what you're talking about. It was hot, super hot, and they just bedded in that stuff all day long.
Yeah, it's pretty wicked to see, actually.
Yeah. So I wasn't even thinking that part of it, to be honest with you, the habitat component. I was thinking more the weed suppression, the carbon, the cycling of the nutrients, and, of course, setting up that super awesome seed bed for the fall planting.
Absolutely. And that's a big portion, something that we really got to think about when we're putting these mixes together and what our goals were. Obviously we got to take it into context of where guys living and everything else, latitude, longitude, what his annual rainfall is, when his first frost, last frost, all that kind of stuff as well. But, the species that are in this mix are, pretty well adapted to some drier environments. So, if you don't get the rainfall in the summertime, they're still going to grow pretty decent. And they're going to be a higher carbon and nitrogen ratio plant. And so when you go to lay that down in the fall time, you're going to suppress out a lot of weeds. You're going to keep that soil covered, feed a ton of microbes in the soil. And even if a guy was to be rabbit hunting or whatever, they're going to love you for that. And quail hunting or pheasants, I mean, it's going to be awesome.
Well, and again, you and I have talked about this carbon nitrogen ratio before, and it's something that we've been. It's the initial reason why we started this whole thing, because as we tried to tweak and steer carbon nitrogen ratios to get what we wanted out of a plot, I quickly realized, and there's no one I know who's better at that than you. I quickly realized the average food plotter is not going to want or have the time, especially my clients, to try to figure this out and chase that. So that's when we started developing in 2018 the Reload blends, which started off as 2 blends before we commercially sold them and turned into 3 in the spring of 19. But contextually coming, basically when we're planting summer squatch, we're, many of us, and you don't have to, this isn't a requirement, but many of us are sitting here with, again, these amazing looking, fall reload or whatever, fall nourishment, whatever I had a client plant, plots that are just, like you said earlier, I don't know if it was earlier now or if we were recording, but the hairy vetch just looks fantastic right now, depending on where you're at. Latitude-wise, the crimson clover's playing out or blooming, but so we're sitting there with a lot of legumes in the fields, right? So it's likely, and you can argue with me, you're kind of the king of carbon nitrogen, but it's likely a much, much lower carbon nitrogen scenario that we're going into. And that was my thought with the higher carbon nitrogen blend. But also just by default, I mean, like I said, we were looking for a super tall, fast growing mix, one that's not going to end up with a whole bunch of weeds in it, but get tall quick.
Yeah, so this can go in a lot of different rabbit trails.
Yeah, you don't have to go too deep in the weeds on that, but I guess you can hit whatever you want to.
Well, there's so many components of this that really tie together really well to have a really good understanding of when we're talking about carbon to nitrogen, what does that mean? And even, thinking about the food or the diet for those deer and other wildlife throughout, the winter months, especially, of what they really need. Carbon and nitrogen plays into that role on both sides, really. And so, when we're looking at carbon and nitrogen in a plant material, your legumes, your brassicas, things like that are going to be a very low carbon and a very high nitrogen plant material. So how this works is think about the microbes in the soil and the microbes on the plants and everything else. They have this carbon and nitrogen diet that they need to maintain as well. And so let's say a bacteria might have anywhere from a 3 parts carbon, 1 part nitrogen to a 5 part carbon, 1 part nitrogen, balanced diet. That's what they need to survive. Then you've got fungi, protozoa, earthworms, moles and voles and mice and birds and everything else that has a carbon to nitrogen ratio. So bacteria being basically the smallest, and then everything above that on this hierarchy of a food chain is much larger. And so all these species kind of feed on each other, right? And so if you've got protozoa that have a 15-to-1 carbon to nitrogen ratio, they eat the bacteria in the soil and on plants as well. And so think of the bacteria as being the mice of the soil and the protozoa being a coyote. Coyote eats mouse, right? So you've got, let's say, a bacteria that's got 3-to-1 carbon to nitrogen ratio, and you got a protozoa at a 15-to-1. They're going to eat 5 of the bacteria to get their 15 parts carbon. But now they've got 4 extra nitrogens in their body and that they don't need. So they release that back out into the soil as plant available nitrogen. That's part of the nitrogen cycle and the whole nutrient cycle. So, a soil microbial average is about 8-to-1. And then the ideal microbial diet is 24-to-1. So what that means is microbes need about 8 parts of carbon, 1 part nitrogen just for their maintenance needs. And I'm sorry, I'm getting probably kind of technical here, Jason, but bear with me. I'm going somewhere.
No, that's good stuff. I was just thinking to myself, we should probably charge for this podcast because I love it when the listeners learn this stuff, but there's going to be some consultants out there tomorrow doing YouTube videos on all this. But no, that's
cool.
They're
probably going to steal my stuff.
I know that's why I'm just kind of letting you go because it is good stuff, and it's one of those things that we knew early on wasn't going to be something that everybody wanted to deal with and to do. And some of them now, on Facebook, will be talking about the average microbial. Which I like microbes, so I'm good with that. But so again, I think contextually, after hearing what you just said, I know when I first showed this to you, you were like, "Whoa, what are you doing with this? It's a super high carbon nitrogen ratio." But understand, I think cycling nutrients for a lot of us is extremely important as a goal, right? Or objective,
right.
Whatever. So, I have clients who are saying to me, "Listen, I understand that using chemicals." Responsibly might be, an okay thing, but I don't want to. This is a wildlife situation. I'm not trying to produce yield or make money doing it. Same with synthetics and whatever. So we're starting to look not just, this year, next year. We're looking 5 years, 10 years, whatever, 20 years down the road, and seeing a massive improvement in our soils, just the tilth and the soil health, the smell, the feel, the whole 9 yards, just in 3 or 4 years, contrary to what our, college professors told us it would take 1,000 years or whatever bullshit they told us to, add 1% organic matter was like the holy grail to those guys, and they still didn't understand what it was. But I guess I'm just kind of the thought process has been put behind this, and I'm excited to get some out there. Obviously, it's crunch time now. We have plenty of time. Our shipping has been pretty much dead on. Yeah. So I just you know what? You and I this morning were talking about the different management applications of this. As far as
that's where I was going with this.
There you go. Go ahead. I'll let you roll with it. It's fun listening to ag guys talk deer, man. It's so cool.
Yeah. So when I'm looking at these carbon to nitrogen ratios, realize that nitrogen is protein, right? And so when you're looking at when I go to the farm store and I just cruise through like the hunting side and I see all these pre-mixed bags of food plots,
it's
crap.
So much fun. So much fun. My family
ridiculous.
Still get so pissed at me. I don't go in many of them anymore, but I was in Tractor Supply and it was just a Ace Hardware, and they had one and they're like, let's go. Come on. I was looking at like Evolved or somebody and looking at the bag, and the germ was like 2 years ago and it had 3 sticker labels on it, and it's so much fun though.
Yeah, but it's like all clovers and some brassicas and a little bit of oats or something like that, But these are all really low carbon to nitrogen ratio plants. They're all high protein because I guess we've been taught that, or we've been ingrained to think we got to have protein to make these deer. Well, when it's cold out, do you need protein or energy?
I need energy all the time, my body. I'm like a hummingbird.
There you go. So you need this energy to stay warm and to stay active. So having these higher carbon to nitrogen plants out there, even if we don't roll it down and plant into it, we leave some standing. Those deer are going to come in there and they're going to forage on those dead leaves after they've matured out and frost killed out in the middle of winter. They're going to feed on the leaves. When I think about cattle, when I go out and graze cattle on corn stalk field after it's been harvested, the cows don't eat the stalks. They're eating the leaves and the husk. Mm-hmm. And so, there's 16 pounds of leaves and husk per bushel out there. So I can roughly figure out what I need to make, how many animals I can put on an acre per se. But where I'm going with all this is, so we've got these high carbon, no nitrogen plants out there. The deer, whatever, is going to eat the leaves off, and now we're just left with stalks. Well, even if we rolled these plants down in the fall time, the microbes are going to consume those leaves relatively quickly, and we're left with stalks. Nothing's going to eat the stalks. They'll lay on it, they'll bed on it, but it provides excellent suppression of weeds and helps to maintain soil moisture. On the flip side of this, if we've got these really low carbon, high nitrogen food plot mixes, and I see this in the cover crop world, even on the row crop side, because they're going in front of corn and they want a lot of nitrogen, they don't think about the carbon influx into this. Those plants are taking 30 to 40% of the carbon they capture through CO2 that they combine with water through photosynthesis for all their energy needs in that plant to make glucose. 30 to 40% of that is released out into the soil system through the roots to feed microbes in exchange for nutrients. The microbes are releasing CO2, and that CO2, as long as you've got a growing plant there, is being taken back up, and this whole photosynthesis cycle, this is all part of the carbon cycle, just continues. Mm-hmm. Well, if we got a laid down cover crop on there, those microbes are in that soil. We've got that cover crop right there. on that soil surface. So they're decomposing that, and that carbon, 85% of that carbon is being released right into the atmosphere, CO2. If we got a growing plant right next to it, it's capturing that. We're not losing it. So we're building the soil carbon, which is building the aggregate structure, which is building the nutrient cycle, which is increasing our water infiltration and our water holding capacity. And like you said, by doing these mixes and having them staggered out, if you're doing a fall reload, spring reload, summer reload, whatever, but you're doing all these on 3 different fields and you're rotating them out and terminating at different times, and then you throw summer squatch into this, my gosh, within 6 years you should be able to easily dig into your soils with your fingers without really even needing much of a spade. It should just be crumbly in your hands. It should smell really rich and earthy, and when you squeeze it, it should feel like what you'd envision, like just holding on to a cloud and squeezing a cloud. It should just have so much more resilient to it. But when you got these food plot mixes and everything that are legumes and brassicas, even these guys are just throwing like 4 pounds of radish out there. That's, low carbon, high nitrogen. Sure, it's sequestering out a bunch of excess nutrients in that soil profile, but when they decay out, they're not really giving any carbon back to that soil, and the microbes in that soil need carbon. So what happens is the microbes start to eat the organic matter and the aggregates that were in the soil, and they just completely collapse and compact that soil system. So then we reduce the water infiltration, we reduce the oxygen flow into that soil, we reduce the amount of CO2 coming out of that soil, we reduce plant growth, we've reduced the amount of weed suppression that we've had. It's just a bunch of negative cascading compounding effects.
Bingo. So it's funny when you mentioned I was just going to leave some silence there, but when you mentioned the collapse of the system, that's what I realized back in like 17 into 2018, when I started changing up our blends dramatically, and everybody else was still planting monoculture soybeans and laughing at what we were doing. It was like, oh, wait a minute, this makes sense, because here we are planting low carbon, high nitrogen products, because the Whitetail Institute and Tecumate and those guys were arguing over who had the first deer clover, the best deer clover. And all we had was grasses, quote unquote, out competing. They would say Whitetail Institute would always say, you get 3 to 5 years, right? 3 to 5 years, and then you need to kill it, turn it in, and start a new plot. Well, that was the whole issue from day one. Is the soil, the microbes were trying to tell us something, and instead of observing and going, oh, okay, this makes sense, why don't we give it what it wants, instead of grabbing that grass specific selective herbicide. I've got a book from a food plot PhD, not a food plot PhD, a food plot book from a PhD. I make the joke that I have it on my shelf because I don't know the chemicals. You're pretty sharp on the chemicals. I got out of the chemicals. I knew quite a few of them, but the book itself is carcinogenic. There's so much reference to chemicals in that book, it's unreal. But for 20, 30 years, we fought these grasses that came in, these forbs that came in, without stepping back for a minute and just observing and identifying the fact that the soil was trying to right itself by throwing specific functional groups, grasses, forbs, broadleaves, whatever, into that system. So once we started to give the system what it wanted, so instead of Johnson grass or foxtail or whatever, we gave it the cereals, and we gave it the cereals often and on the seasons, and before we knew it, we had cereal grains obviously pumping that carbon to balance that carbon nitrogen ratio. And that was kind of some of the first, or one of the first aha moments in this whole I don't know what you would call it, this farming in nature's image, or just changing the way we do things. So yeah, what you just described was the perfect situation, and why we came onto the scene doing what we were doing, first with clients and then commercially with the reload products. And I think others are finally starting to follow. I wish they would help innovate instead of just imitate. But at any rate, you get enough of that. So what else, man? The goal was I was going to do this in like 10, 20 minutes, but there's so much to talk about. I think you and I were talking about, and you were kind of alluding to there, the management opportunities. If you have a 5-acre field right now coming out of, say, fall reload, you don't have to go in there and lay that whole thing down and plant summer squatch, right? You could go in there and do half of it or do a third of it and change up. I've got this new client in Missouri. This last client I just signed on with I'm going to go see him, but he's got a 20-acre field in the middle, and he's had other consultants come, and they still don't know what to do with this 20-acre field. And I'm sitting here like, are you kidding me? That's like giving an artist a blank canvas, and 3 to 5 years go by, and nobody's painting a pretty little tree here. Like, what the hell are you waiting for? Let's do this, right? So I think, you kind of hit the nail on the head before we started recording, is to make sure guys realize they don't have to go all in on this. They can do half of it and not really completely eliminate what forages they have available in different seasons. Make sure there's always something available at different stages, because obviously we were thinking ahead finally with the fall reload or fall nourishment, which I'm super excited about. That gave us a bunch of plant residue right now. So let's think ahead again and maybe only do half of that in summer squatch. I'm looking at the carbon nitrogen reaction. So I'm going to probably go full bore with my summer squatch this year just to see if we need any more minor tweaks. I don't think we do. I think everything looks good. But again, I think just kind of driving home that management aspect. And I don't know if you want to, I know you said some about it, if you want to kind of touch on that.
Well, there's so much. When we're looking at these ecosystems and look at the woods around you, I mean, I use that as kind of my, this is a painting already that nature's created and God created us to just mimic, right? And you don't just have one tree species, one grass species out there. There's different things growing. So the diversity is always huge. But the disruption is something that I think a lot of people struggle with. And so disrupting patterns, not doing something the same way all the time, not having the same species in a mix all the time and disrupting that, because those species are feeding out those root exudates. You're getting those microbes accustomed to it, and you're picking and choosing what you want there. And eventually it just becomes like a corn soybean pendulum swing. That's not even a rotation, but you've only just picked out what microbes you want to survive in that environment.
Solid point. That disruption point is a solid point, because it was one concern that I had. Even though we're throwing 15 to 17 or more different species at the soil when we go with the reload blends, it still can be viewed like as humans. This is where you were going with this, I think, with that, like you said, pendulum. They call it what's your rotation? It's corn soybeans. That's not a rotation. That's like you said, it's a pendulum swing. So, and I was a bit concerned going spring, summer, fall, or spring, fall. There's still a pattern there where you have pests, insects, diseases, etc. And I love those planned disturbances, and nobody's better at describing that scenario than one of your partners, Dr. Alan Williams. That's one of the things we were looking for. Is we wanted to shake it up in the summertime and really throw the weed species profile for a loop. And then also going into the fall cash crop for us, if you will, we also wanted to throw some of those pest species for a loop so they couldn't do their thing, hit a predictive cycle, and then cause an issue for us in the fall. And then I had another thought and I lost it, so I'll let you go ahead and hit on that.
Well, I mean, that's, we talk a lot in Understanding Ag about the 643, and even in the Soil Health Academies, we educate on that, the 6 principles of soil health, the 4 ecosystem processes, and the 3 rules of adaptive stewardship. And really, I kind of hammered on the 3 rules of adaptive stewardship with the cascading and compounding effects, the disruption and the diversity. Diversity's in all of the 643 because that's how important it is. But that disruption piece, you picture that 20-acre field, and if you were just to split it out in thirds or split it out in quarters, and you're planting it north and south, well, the next year you might split it east and west, or you might make a block in there in the center that's different than everything else. But you can alternate these disruptions every year. And especially when you're splitting it out and planting it at different times, it allows you to alternate all of those disruptions at all times, and that's huge. Another thing I was thinking about here too is like with this summer squatch, is that I work with a lot of farmers who they'll lease out their ground to deer hunters, and their deer hunters might pay them to leave 4 or 6 rows of corn around a tree line, so those deer can go in there and have something to eat. But really, when I think about these big bucks out here, and everybody talks about them going nocturnal and not seeing them, well, they hang out on the inside of that tree line, and where that corn is, they might sneak out into the corn because they feel pretty safe yet. They've got all that canopy around them, and so they can come out there and forage, and once it gets dark, they'll go out into the field. So you leave something like that, that summer squatch just standing, maybe you don't roll it all down. You leave some of it standing where those bucks will go into there and just kind of hang out. Man.
Yeah.
That's like shooting fish in a barrel.
Yeah, but your bucks in Cass County, by the way, David's in southern Illinois. They're easy to kill, though, just from
Central.
the start. Central. Yeah. Cass County, Central. But but the one thing I want to point out is that's something that we're doing on the Kiefer property, the Humanimal project, which isn't far from you. Is we've established these larger both Vanish and Summer Squatch plots that we can then go into later and manipulate. But so you had a couple really good things, and I'll leave some of that, the 20-acre field. Maybe I'll do a podcast on that. A lot of guys, when I first visit them, they want, how would you set this 20-acre field up like it's a one-and-done type deal? Whereas I'm looking at that as sort of a buffet. They never keep the foods in the tins the same, all year long. Eventually they'll change up the food groups in those tins in the buffet. So why shouldn't we, introduce those disrupting patterns? And that's one of the things I just kind of want to drop and point out to the listeners. But I'm going to wrap it up because this was going to be like a 10, 20, 30-minute podcast. It's a Sunday. It's a long weekend. You have some kind of party to go to. But I want to finish on this one more thing, which is, we talked about these planned disruptions, and if you just keep doing the same thing over and over again in nature, there are quote-unquote pests that figure that out. They figure that cycle out, and even though you think you're not being obvious with your tendencies, you are. Right? That's how good nature is. Basically patterning you like we pattern whitetails. So, interestingly, with the spring, summer, fall reload and all of our blends, we are constantly gutting those blends. So this is one of the reasons I like. We've made a change here recently. We're no longer with the previous company I worked with. So now we control 100% of it. So being small, not being handcuffed to a specific species or variety that we have too much of, we're now able to do this. What I do for clients, which is make custom blends on the spot and turn around the next day and start shipping them. And I'm super proud of that. The best part of that is I can email, text, or call customers of the seed company, find out what they're happy with, what they're not happy with, and our response time is immediate. So in other words, we can turn around and bag up 1 or 10,000 bags, change one component. In this particular summer squatch, we have Mexican sorghum, which I think you guys are going to really enjoy. And of course, there's a bunch of other components, but we have the ability to not only change that species, but we can also change the poundage in an acre. So I'm going to wrap that up. I want people to understand that we are constantly changing what's in the bag. So, that was part. I know initially people said, well, send me a picture of what spring reload looks like. Well, first of all, it's going to look different in every field, right? Every soil is different. David, do you agree with that?
Oh, I see that all the time. I love it when somebody will plant, especially after like wheat harvest, even out in Kansas, central Kansas, and they plant a warm season mix of like 12, 15, 20 different species. And in one part of the field, something thrives, and another part of the field, something else thrives. It's just like whatever that soil needs to balance it is what thrives there. So
yeah, and that's the beauty of this system for sure. And then of course we change it constantly to disrupt the system and just keep throwing different resources at it. So, well, man.
Hey, Jason.
Yeah.
Real quick, if you're planting this Mexican sorghum, isn't it a requirement that you have to have like a jalapeno margarita?
No doubt. Why'd you have to bring that up? That's personal.
Well, I just was wondering. And it's about that time.
Oh, it's beyond that time. Yeah. That's something I picked up that drink. I'd never had that drink. There's several variations in being in Texas and in the hill country. There's bars everywhere. But man, if you've never had the jalapeno margarita or various pepper margaritas, man, they're good. Why'd you have to bring that up?
Hey, I figured you were probably going to take Mama out to dinner here in a little bit and go get you one.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, buddy, I appreciate this Sunday morning conversation turned into a podcast, and I want to do more of these about the blends and what we're doing, and sort of point out the method to the madness, and so people don't think that we're just trying to hide what we're doing. It's constantly evolving, and that's what's best for nature anyway. So
there's no one size fits all, man.
That's right. Any closing input?
No, that was it.
Good deal. All right, buddy. Until next time, I appreciate you. And thanks for everybody for listening. I guess you know what I should say. It's a 25 pounds to the acre for summer squatch. The bags, they're online at Drop-Tine You can go to specialty blends or regenerative blends. But it's under several categories on there. Summer squatch, 25 pounds to the acre. I say 3/4 of an inch, David. I know there's a lot going on in the farming world right now. Adjusting. I said this was going to be over. This could be a whole nother podcast. What am I doing?
Well, let's talk about it real quick.
What the heck?
Let's talk
Go
about
ahead.
that. So, yeah, if you're going into a fall reload type program or whatever, even a spring reload program, and you've got forages there, and we talk about setting that drill planter at 3/4 of an inch deep, I mean, it's pretty critical we get out there and measure, checking seed depth.
No.
Because we can set it, but I mean, you're on 2 inches maybe or 3 inches of cover crop mat that you just rolled down or you're planting into that your gauge wheels are sitting up on. So you might have to set that drill at like 1 inch, 3/4, 2.5 inches or whatever, 3 inches just to get that depth that you need. So a lot of times I'll get, but hey, this didn't work out. I had that with corn last year. I had some guys that we were looking at corn and scouting, and I was digging up the corn, and I'm like, why'd you plant it so shallow here? Well, they're like, well, it was good in the other part of the field. And I'm like, yeah, but that part of the field, you didn't have very good cover crops. This part of the field, you had really thick cover crops. So you planted it at 3/4 of an inch, and it should have been planted at like 2 inches, But you also have to keep in mind of what's your moisture. I mean, this year.
You beat me to it. That's where I was headed with it.
Yeah, this year we've had so much moisture in some areas that, planting too deep, that seed will sit there and rot, But if you're too dry, planting too shallow, it might not, have enough moisture to get going.
Yeah.
But also, if you've got that green growing cover crop up there and you lay it down, that moisture that's in that stem is going to start seeping into the ground, and it's going to be more moist there. So, it's so forgiving. There's so much resilience in this system. You just have to, be patient, be flexible, and monitor and measure a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. So I've been in the spring, again, depending on what I'm going into, in the spring, I've been planting deeper. But in something like this, I'm not going to be as concerned about that because, like you said, just the sheer mat, the suppression mat that we're going to be creating. And you'll see this, those of you who grow this or have grown something similar, after you lay it down and drill your seed. I used to tell customers every third year or fourth year, fall season. So let's just say, July, August, September, depending on your latitude, we would drill in our fall plots, super excited, go bass fishing. It would get so hot, so dry. I remember one year I went on a sheep hunt in August, beginning of August. So I just planted all my stuff in late July, went to the Northwest Territories in August, came back. I don't think it rained at all for like 2 or 3 weeks. And it was basically a start over, do over. The resilience and doing it this way, I think we're going to have far better plots just from that moisture management standpoint. That just starting right there. Would you agree?
Absolutely, 100%.
Awesome. All right, man. We gave them enough. I appreciate you. Stay on here. We're not done yet.
Till next time.
All right, brother.
All right.
Hey, thanks everybody.